Hello, I'm Justin Sherman, and this is my ethnography for the Race and Culture and Gender Study class. So, it is the last day of the last hour, pretty much to submit this video, but here it is. So we're going to look at really what makes Justin Sherman, why I am who I am. So when we look at that organizational dimensions chart, this thing right here, looks like we got 1, 2, 3, 4 layers. We're going to tear that apart. And the things, the 3 layers are going to be the organizational dimensions we'll talk about, internal dimensions, which is the middle layer, the external dimensions, and then finally the inner core, which is the personality of Justin. So as we peel these apart, then we can see the outside influences of what kind of shapes his ideals and what he's surrounded by and what kind of parameters is placed on him as far as his ideas and beliefs. So when we start out, we can look at it as Justin works in the healthcare system, or he works as a healthcare worker. This is the work content or field he works in. The department is, he has 2 different, this is going to sound awkward, but from now on I'm going to talk to myself in the third person, because that's how I think it is. If we were going to do a true ethnography of who this person is, that's how I'm going to address it. So Justin works in the Department of Defense and also in the Department of Veteran Affairs. So what does that mean? He both works in the United States Army as a reservist, and his job is a 68 Whiskey or a healthcare sergeant, and then his second job is a phlebotomist or medical tech at the Veteran Affairs Hospital in Spokane. So as we can see, both of these work together as they're both in the healthcare system. What does that mean for him? He's influenced by a constant barrage of mandatory trainings of equal opportunities, sexual harassment, or equality in the workplace, and different briefings and classes on how you can't be discriminatory in these workplaces, because as you've seen, from 2007, there was a huge shift in how the Army viewed itself as making an equal opportunity for both gender and race and culture. So we see a different kind of Army coming into play, one that allows women in combat arms, and with the newest release of the first group of females coming through Army Ranger School soon to be in spring of 2015. And one thing that Justin did is he was a medic at Ranger School, and one of the things that was really torqued up was that the masculinity that came behind wearing the Ranger tab. And becoming a qualified Ranger meant that you were a man and you had masculine traits about you. The other part was the running joke was that the reason that there isn't as many black Rangers is because it's kind of a racial stereotype that black people can't swim. Justin didn't prescribe to these stereotypes, but it was noted that during certain selection processes throughout his Army career, he noticed that the attrition rate for certain not genders, but different races and ethnicities excelled at certain things, whereas others did not do so well. And now we'll move on to seniority. So we said that Justin's a sergeant in the United States Army Reserves. What that means is he's a middle manager, and he is assigned soldiers, and in the Army Reserves, these assignments are basically told, and there's no volunteering or there's no requests as to who he's going to serve or going to supervise over. Whereas it's different in the VA hospital, because just as a regular job, you are employed at a place and you volunteer to work there, and as long as you volunteer to work there, you're subject to those superiors. At the VA hospital, of course, Justin's at the very bottom of the food chain on that one. He's the lowest paid employee in the hospital as a bloodsucker or a guy who draws blood. And so the things that shape him in both organizations is that he realizes that there are people placed in different genders and races and ethnicities that are over him. He has no control over it. And of course, he realizes that the race that he has, which is half Japanese, is nothing that's going to hold him back or it's going to excel him. The work location is, of course, at the VA hospital with the Veteran Affairs, and then in the Army it's going to be on Fairchild Air Force Base. The work locations, being located in Spokane, the influences are that this community is largely white, and that he's definitely a minority being Asian, and even more so being in the Pacific Northwest. The other organizational dimension is the union affiliations, which is, like we said, the Department of Defense and the Department of the Veteran Affairs. So with that comes different stipulations, like the last with the president and President Obama, and how he dictates on who is the chairman of the Veteran Affairs. And as we saw, the last director was Shinseki, and if you paid notice to that, Shinseki was Asian. And of course, no one made any mention to me, or I didn't hear any back talk about how an Asian cannot run the VA system or shouldn't be in the VA system, because as we know, a lot of veterans were in the Pacific, and like my grandfather, worked as intelligence against the Japanese in the World War II. And then the last part of the organizational dimensions is management status, which is, like I said, I'm the lowest on the pay poll for the VA, but I'm also middle manager in the United States United States Reserve. So as you can see, we're going to move on to the second layer, which is internal dimensions. As you can see, I'm half Japanese and half white. My ethnicity comes basically from my external family telling me that, hey, you're Japanese, this is what Japanese people do. So in the summertime, we would go to Obonodoris, or basically Obon meaning a festival, and Dori is to dance, so we go to these dancing festivals, and I would be immersed in the culture in the sense that the women would wear traditional kimonos, and the men would wear, little bands around their head, and there would be lanterns hanging, and we would eat Japanese food and play Japanese games and do Japanese festivals with Japanese drummers up on a tower, and we dance around this tower. And that's how I learned what it was about. And basically all I got from it was, you just get to eat a lot of good food. Other internal dimensions or diversities I have no control over is my physical ability, and being that I've been blessed by my father and my mother to have pretty athletic genes, and that I take no credit. It doesn't help Asians to seem more superior, or I don't feel like Asians are less superior because of that. And at the same time, my influence were that Asians are more athletic in any event, or they're not. But however, like I said before, with the Army, it was my perception of basically black people being able to swim was accelerated by the fact that I was able to observe at least 8 men go into a swimming assessment, and out of those 8 people, 6 of them struggled. And it was interesting to see that. And the thing that was relayed to me is it's a cultural thing. It's not necessarily his race, the color of his skin, but it was his culture. The culture for young boys, maybe where he was from, was not to go and swim in a lake or go swim in the ocean or something like that, but was to go ride a bike, or maybe to go, play basketball. Whereas for me, as a kid, I learned to go swim in the ocean and surf and things like that. So swimming came a little bit more natural. And it was also evident, of course, to other, white people that, maybe they were raised on a farm and swimming wasn't available to them. Anyways, sexual orientation, I am straight, and I'm a male, and I'm 32 years old, and as I said, my race is Asian. As we see in Howard Taylor on page 8, he says that physical appearance is such thing as skin color, and one thing I noticed is that, as you can see, my skin color is kind of tan, so it's not white. And if we ascribe to what the stereotype is Asians are yellow, that would not really work. I mean, if we have this yellow crayon here and we compare it to my skin, that does not work. The other thing he talks about is, so that's skin color, hair texture, lip form, nose form, and so on. That's on page 8. So if we were to go by my nose, it's rather pointy. I mean, it's really weird, but whatever. I got it from my father. And then my eyes are slanted. So, and of course the running joke, I loved that we saw it on that first YouTube video. But, the girl saying, "Look at me, I'm white." I used to do the same thing as a kid, and before that came out, because I was so tired of people, like, making their slanty eyes and saying, "Look at me, I'm Justin," or "Look at me, I'm Chinese," and I would try to correct them and say, "No, I'm not Chinese, I'm Japanese." And lip form, and so on. So, here's a hint, like, there's a way to tell the difference, for me at least. You can always tell the difference between Japanese and Chinese. Chinese people typically have, I think their noses are a little more flat, but that's just me. Let's move on. The second definition he talks about, for social construct and how I define myself in that. And so in that case, you can see as proof in Spokane where people are not exposed to the different Koreans or Filipinos or Chinese and Japanese having to differentiate themselves. I'm just lumped into that whole Asian thing. So, and then if we go on Taylor's third definition, I've been told that, or Justin's been told that, when you group yourself into a race because of your, because of someone else telling you who you are. In this case, it wasn't Adolf Hitler, but you just look at outside influences telling you who you are. Let's move on to the external dimensions. So we talked about the graphic location of Spokane is largely white, and that's a huge influence because it determines how I'm supposed to conduct myself as an Asian and or as a half Asian in society. And so as we saw from Chan in page 135, they talk about this model minority. So that model minority is a certain racial group that excels at certain things. So we think of people who have a perceived higher level of success with income, education, and they have low crime rates in their communities. So as you can tell in Spokane, there's not really a concentration of Asians. I mean, if there was, I don't know where it is. But it was perceived when I lived in California that Asians were known to be the scholars. And I can tell you that's true because you look at the student enrollments at Cal State University or UCLA, and they're large, the enrollment numbers are higher among Asians. And I can see how that perpetuates that stigma. But also, as we saw in our book, in our reading, there's a harm with that because the youth suicides in America have the highest rate on page 135. And of course, it says, Chan goes on to say in our book that because of that perception that they come from wealthy families that are high educated and they're privileged, that they will have less need for private scholarships, government aid, and job assistance. And so one thing I'll say is that I have reported on every application that I am Asian, and for both government aid and for student financing for school, and also for when I apply for jobs, and it doesn't for job assistance, and I don't see that it has any weight on it. But then again, it could be the veteran side of it, that I'm a veteran and I get preference over other people because of that. Now we move on to personal habits. most of those come from my father, and being a white male, and that bearing the load as a father, you just need to, me being a father now myself, I just need to provide for my family and things like that, despite of what has been dealt to me. So in our studies of Black and White, the movie, I see that Bruno is kind of, I can relate to Bruno a lot, you know. It doesn't matter what you are, it's how you play the hand you're dealt, you know. If you want to put your head in the sand and say, you know what, I've been dealt this bad hand by this race I have and everyone's against me, then I think that'll come of itself. But if you just, you know, put your heart into whatever you're working on and you persevere, that you'll be a success. Educational background, a little bit about me is also that I went to a school, and most of my school was in Southern California, and I came up to Spokane for high school. So I got to see both sides of the picture of what really being a minority was, as far as in Southern California, I had Asian friends, and I had, you know, every single part of the spectrum, but I never related to one certain group. It was more based on what activities we did. And so I hung out with the kids that normally did skateboarding. But then when I moved to Spokane, I noticed that there was not a group of people that associated, there was people that associated with skateboarding, but as far as what people did what, there was no, you know, certain black groups or Mexican groups or gangs of that sort. One thing is that we see in on page 304 of our textbook is that, you know, with interracial marriages, as I'm half Asian, that's because of my mother is half Japanese and my father is white, and they met in high school. But it kind of goes against what the statistics say in page 304 about how similar people with similar educations and incomes will marry, because that kind of doesn't really make sense if you're in high school. But I guess it does if you are high school graduates. And in the end, as they were married, they ended up both getting college educations. Now, if we look at me and my wife currently, at the time when I met her, I was in an active Army, and I was a certified EMT, and I considered myself the lower middle class. And then I met my wife, and she was a certified nursing assistant. And so if you could look at it that way, we both had healthcare certificates, which is at the same education level. And then we look at where we are with, you know, income, and that's the same too with those pay grids. So I could see how on page 3 or 4, you know, how race and education come into play with interracial marriages. As me being someone who chose to marry a white woman versus half Japanese or half Asian, or even a whole Asian. It's interesting to see, would we see on that page, on that table, if we took the interracial marriages and worked it through the generations and see where it went from there. My work experience, I've noticed is that, you know, with 8 years in the Army and only 1 year at the VA, the influences that I've seen is that there's different races, as we see on, when we read about Tatum in the first part of the book in page 9, is that you know, the segregation only happens in the Army after you can leave your basically forced work group. And what I notice is that, you know, just the same as people, as Tatum said, they seek self-identity with those who want to associate with people that share similar categorical traits, and that happens. You know, people that came from the same culture, same background, they might not look the same, but they definitely assimilated with the same people. And so, as a part of that, I was also the minority again in my unit, and the unit I'm now, there are very few Asians. So, do I associate with people that have similar looks as me? Do they have slimy eyes? No. Do I look for people who have do I have people that have the same color? No. I associate with people that similar, not traits, but similar goals. And that's exactly what Tatum talks about. He talks about the way to overcome these ethnic problems and diversities is to get people grouped together to accomplish a mission, and that'll do away with any of that racial divide. And so I've noticed that as I have a common goal with other people to get promoted and become a staff sergeant or rank up, that when I associate myself with those people, that it doesn't matter what their race or we have a common goal of just basically making more money and getting a better rank. So when we look at all these things put together, I mean, what does it mean? I mean, so we talked about external dimensions, which is work and things I like to associate and decisions I made to be there, and also things that I have no control over, such as my physical makeup, and also about other things, that organizational dimensions, about the places that I place myself in as far as employment and education. So the things that I've seen is that the influences are pretty wide and pretty broad as far as that goes. I can see where it is enforced and definitely encouraged in the workplace and in both the VA healthcare system and in the Army system, and also at Eastern. There's encouraged that everyone does have equal opportunities. Is it perceived that way? Is that really happening? No, not all the time, but it is. There's a goal. There's a common goal to do that in all these institutions, and so what that does to me is that even though I do have perceptions that are towards race and ethnicity, I do have perceptions, like I said, about black people being able to swim or not. I do still have those perceptions, but I just like these institutions, I'm also have the goal to do away with these perceptions, that they do not exist because of, just because someone's genetic makeup does not make them a bad swimmer. That's because of the way they were raised or cultured. So just as I probably am I am horrible at basketball, it's not because I'm Asian, it's because I didn't play basketball when I was a kid. So that's who I am. Most of it comes from being told countless times through stuff at work that we need to be equals and we can work as equals, but a lot of it just comes from who we are and where we came from. And me being a kid that was raised in Southern California and moved up to Spokane, I do sound a little outspoken sometimes because the influence I've had is that there's a lot more to this world than what's in Spokane, and I've had to work with people that have those influences that have come from different places of the world. I've been able to work with someone from Africa, and I've been able to work and live alongside someone from the Philippines, from Japan, from China, from Brazil, and those are all experiences that have basically come together just to realize that everybody, underneath the skin is the same, in the sense that they want to do good for themselves and they want to succeed. So if we use success of life as a common goal, then we can definitely see something good come out of it. Well, I don't have much left to say. That's all I have. And have a good Christmas.